Hello there, section 24. Here I am again. After a day of just kind of dealing with annoying impediments. Do you ever have a day where just everything seems to go wrong? It doesn't happen to me very often, but having zero internet in the middle of my peat bog, I live way out in the country, I would call that a problem. The internet was out from here to Perham, and it affected Brainerd. It affected D2L in Brainerd. So let's get a little more content to you and get you the first of 3 video lessons, as I call them this week. I'm just trying to make this human, so you know there's somebody here doing their level best to be your teacher. Quick side note, I was just getting some help about a half an hour ago from Liz Tinsley in IT at the computer help desk at CLC. If you ever have any questions or trouble with D2L or anything techie, contact Liz or Andrea at 855-8200. They're just wonderful people to work with, and they're waiting there to help us. Me too. And I needed Liz to help clean up this course a little bit, get rid of some things that I'm not going to have anything to do with, to create that folder that we talked about for the first journals, so you can kind of keep something from before. And I haven't made every decision about that, but I was really grateful to get her help, and I'll get my syllabus up before the afternoon ends. And quick story, when she was doing that, I had kind of an uneasy thought. You probably don't know this, but you will when I get done telling it to you. I had to look this guy's name up. The emperor, the Chinese emperor that built the Great Wall of China, or at least got it started, was a guy named Qin Shi Huang. And he created one of the great wonders of the world. But not a lot of people know, some people don't know that in addition to that, when he became emperor, he issued a dangerous decree, which is that every book written before he became emperor should be burned. And further, that if anyone were ever caught in China reading one of those books, that they would be put to death. The lesson there, it kind of pertains to me. Leaders sometimes want history to begin with them. Think of that years from now when you get a new administrator suddenly at whatever job you're working at. They might want to start all over. And just had to tell you that. I got a little bit of a lesson here for you. I want to try to condense what I can from my first class of the second half of the semester with my 9 and 10 o'clock yesterday. I got to try to keep this in sync because I don't want to go crazy. That's important. And I want to name a poet, and I want to talk about Ernest Hemingway. So things are not very complicated today. The poet, to get us going, that I want to name, and if I could editorialize, you can scrub through it, right? I know you can grab that cursor and, skip the poem and get back to me and whatever the content is. Try not to do that. Try to give each poem, each little segment a chance. The poet I want to name for you today is a man named Spencer Reese, who I'm friends with. I hosted Spencer Reese for A Verse Like Water in the spring, March of 2019, before the world changed. I shared him with the College of St. Benedict and provided ground travel and some of his speaking fee. And we brought him all the way from Spain. And I think the most important thing I can tell you about Spencer is he's had several lives. This man was a clothier when he was young. He worked at high-end clothing stores in the Mall of America. Also became a terrible drinker like his father, and thank goodness he knocked that off, because he resolved to not only be a great American poet, but an Episcopalian priest. So he's a flamboyant gay, a member of the clergy, the first religious person brought to that stage. So I'm really fond of him, and he's connected me with a lot of great poets because he knows everyone. Let's take a look at this little 4-minute thingy, and it offers an account of a wonderful thing that Spencer did with his life. He went with McKnight Foundation money, he went to the most dangerous town in the Honduras, and he went to the only girls' orphanage in that entire country. A lot of girls there. Harmed, wounded by the sex trafficking industry, which is another terrible thing going on in the world, on this planet of misfortune. And he went there for a number of months with the goal of trying to heal these girls a little bit with poetry. He wanted to read poetry to them. He wanted to pull poetry out of them. And the project was fantastic, but it didn't go the way he thought. His Spanish was weak, so they were talking circles around him. And on top of that, they weren't interested in poetry, at least at first. But he got through it, and the project that it resulted in was a wonderful book called Counting Time Like People Count Stars. And what I love about the book, among many things, is it's a compilation of, it's an anthology of poems that these girls produce. Some of them are just beautiful. And what I love about the book especially, forgive this, is that all of 4 of the poets that were involved in the creation of the book are verse-like water poets. Marie Howe was involved, Richard Blanco was involved, Spencer obviously was involved, and so too was the poet laureate of Los Angeles. I haven't named him for you yet, Luis J. Rodriguez. And the book is really, really beautiful. And let's just check this out.
Every week, every day, every hour, every minute, and every second that I pass without my family, it feels like a knife trying to get inside rock. I am the knife and the rock is my life.
There are approximately 250,000 orphans in Honduras. The book came about as a complete accident. I went to this orphanage first to learn Spanish. I had never seen poverty like that in my life. I had never been with orphans in my life. I had never been with so many girls all together. I was there for 2 months. The night before I left, I went up to my apartment, ready to go home, and there was a girl named Gwendolyn who was waiting for me at the top of the staircase. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "Don't forget us. No nos olvides." And those 3 words changed the course of everything. I decided to honor Gwendolyn's request by trying to put together an anthology of poems that would be written by the girls. Poetry. So you'll make one poem for the whole class, and then I'll introduce you to different kinds of poems. There were many problems with this idea of mine. I had never put together an anthology before in my life. I had hardly ever taught. What I'm learning is that poetry is very personal. It exposes things that are sometimes uncomfortable, even for me. This was asking them to open themselves up in a very vulnerable way, and they were very resistant.
I don't like poems.
No?
I think they're so much like the person that write poems, they're in love or they are sad.
The longer I was there, the more I began to learn the actual facts of what these girls had been through. They had been found in wells, they had been beaten up by their parents. So I began to think if I just talked to them, it would be better. And the poems did begin to flow then. And I began to feel like I was a channel to help them to get these things to come out of them. "Here, mister," they began to say to me, "here is a poem for the book."
I'm counting the time like people count the stars. And I'll keep counting until my mother counts.
The poems surprised me. There was a poem called Counting, which was about a girl counting time, waiting for the time when she would graduate from Our Little Roses so she could see her mother in Mexico.
And when I'm finally somebody in this world, God, I'll go straight to Mexico, where my mother lives. And I will stare at her like I stare at the stars. And with a voice that cracks like a thunder, I'll say, I forgive you.
No matter what had happened to these girls, the poem would end in forgiveness. Sylvia Plath's poems never end in forgiveness. Another poem called I Will Be a Happy Girl summoned up the courage by a little girl to will herself to be happy.
When I was 6, I saw my parents a few times between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. I forgot their names. When I look up at the sky, I do not wonder about them.
So after 7 years of work, a film crew, so many people who came to help me and believe in this project, which seemed so improbable. The book will be published this Christmas so that we can honor Gwendolyn's request that the girls never be forgotten.
I think it's just so wonderful that he did that. So when I started my class yesterday up at CLC, I was a little sleepy. I'd been a little rusty too because I took a week off partly because of this course that I've taken on. And I had like a little preamble before I even did the preview. And it was a simple question. I said, how many of you are going to, one thing I didn't ask them, I didn't want to know if any of them were going to watch a horror movie this week to honor Halloween. I didn't want to see all the hands fluttering in the air. But what I did ask them was a similar question. How many of you have an interest in skydiving someday? How many of you are interested in jumping out of a perfectly good plane and falling towards the earth at the terminal velocity of a human being? A bunch of hands went in the air. I said, okay, keep your hand up or put it up if you also have an interest in bungee jumping. And then I had to ask them, why? Why would you do that? Why would you do something scary? Well, they had, the usual reasons for the adrenaline rush of it, to say I did it, because it would be exciting, etc. I wasn't pranking them, but it was a way of letting them know, hey, if that's you, if you want to experience danger, and a lot of young people do, unlike middle-aged people, Ernest Hemingway will understand you, and you will understand him. Faulkner is way more complicated, Fitzgerald too, than Hemingway. Hemingway only had one theme, one thing to write about, and that was fear, or courage, which he called grace under pressure. Hemingway was constantly putting characters in his stories and in his novels in grave danger, the same way he did Francis McComber. And then as the reader, we kind of watch and see, are they going to survive it? Are they going to find the courage to make it, to transcend that moment? Or are they going to collapse as cowards? And if you've got through The Short Happy Life of Francis McComber, you've found out why his life was so short and why it was happy. He discovered in his heart courage. I forgot to tell my people yesterday, I even had a heart drawn on the board. One of the things I love about the great Spanish language is that the word heart in Spanish is the same word for courage, corazón. And there I am again, wishing I knew more languages. Well, let me tell you some things about Hemingway, and I'll try to float a few. I've got a PowerPoint going in front of me, the one I showed yesterday, and it's kind of hard to weave a PowerPoint into this, even with Final Cut Pro, so I'll get a few images up. Hemingway, just to get all historical and stuff, was born in Oak Park, Illinois, which was is to this minute a suburb east of Chicago. His father was a physician, so they were pretty well off. And I'm sorry to report to you that suicide, a very difficult subject in any class, anywhere, suicide runs in families. Hemingway's father killed himself, so did Hemingway, and so did, I think, at least one of Hemingway's children. There's something in the DNA there that I do not pretend to understand. He was an okay student. He didn't go to college, and he, among the Lost Generation writers, he's the one that got closest to the blood in World War I. I told my students yesterday, and I'll tell you the same thing. There have been wars in this country that American boys didn't want to go fight in. Vietnam would be a pretty classic example. But World War I and World War II, young men in this country, they wanted to go. In World War I, you wanted to go fight the Kaiser. Faulkner tried, Fitzgerald tried, but Hemingway, he got there. He got out on those battlefields. And very famously, every English major knows that there was a point early in the war there where the 19-year-old Ernest Hemingway was driving a Red Cross ambulance that was full of chocolate and cigarettes, and it was hit by a mortar. And you can see a picture of him here standing post-injury. It blew the ambulance up completely. Hemingway came out. His kneecap wasn't exactly where it was supposed to be. He was concussed to smithereens. He didn't even know where he was. And eyewitnesses saw him running off the battlefild, carrying a wounded Italian soldier while being strafed with machine gun fire. And I would call that a badass, because Hemingway really was. Not only did he do that with his characters, he put himself, in real life, in constant danger. And that had rewards and consequences at the same time. So just to speed up a little bit, the war ends and Hemingway found himself in Paris. Everybody after the war wanted to be in Paris, particularly in the 20s. And this woman, Gertrude Stein, was kind of the center of that whole scene. She was married to a woman, with a woman, her lover, Alice Toklas, who wrote a very famous cookbook. And they basically set up in Paris the first museum of modern art. And I got to tell you this, everybody went there. Everybody who was cool, who was an artist in Paris, say mid-20s, 25, 26, 27, it was the place to be seen. There are photographs out there of these writers together with Gertrude Stein. Pablo Picasso would go there. Composers like Debussy, Maurice Ravel, Matisse, all these unbelievably cool people hung out together. And I'm really interested in that, in the idea that sometimes in history, particularly in cities like New York, Paris, etc., certain times draw certain people together, and they fuel and inspire each other. And it's a fun thing to think about. It fell apart, like all things do, I suppose. But anyway, it was Gertrude Stein who said to these writers one night, "You are a lost generation. You are all a lost generation." And that was it, man. That's when they were given their moniker or their name, and it stuck. And here I am, all in the years in the future, talking about them. This photograph of Ernest Hemingway makes me happy and sad at the same time. It makes me happy because he looks like $1 million. He's also standing there with Sylvia Beach to his right. She owned a very famous bookstore that still operates in Paris called Shakespeare and Company. And I'm sorry to report to you that it makes me sad because he's got a bandage around his head. The night before, famously, he was swinging from a chandelier while partying. And he pulled the whole thing, plaster and all, down onto his head. And it was one of the many head injuries he suffered in his life. And those compiled into a pretty rough day in America. So, what else do I want to show you here? Hemingway had 4 homes as he became a millionaire, writing novels and short stories. He had a home in Florida, he had a home in Michigan, he had a home in Ketchum, Idaho, where he took his own life, and he also had a home in Italy, which he loved. And one thing I can kind of tell you about him is that he was kind of like a chameleon, right? Wherever he went, he would just kind of go local with whatever the customs were. So when he went, obviously, to Michigan, he wore wool, he wore Pendletons, he wore fleece. When he went to Cuba, to visit his friend Fidel Castro, he wore Cuban shirts and smoked cigars. And that friendship with Castro, by the way, is the reason why there's an FBI file on him this thick. And I don't think I'm going to show you that. There's a photograph that I showed my 9 o'clock people. They were kind of taken aback by it. We'll just skip that one. It's a photograph of Hemingway when he's older and he's standing in a bathroom in Italy holding a double-barreled shotgun, his favorite, the one he would kill himself with. And he had that photo taken by a local newspaper because his apartment had been burgled a few times. And he wanted it published to let any potential thief know, okay, if you knock on the Hemingway's door, you will be greeted with this. Anyway, that's just a little blurb on his life and times, and I got more to tell you when we get back together on Wednesday. And I'm going to put one thing before you now, a second thing to watch that is pretty much my favorite thing on the internet. Now, I don't know if this is going to work because the last time I tried it, I got a robot on YouTube, slap my hand. And it was one of the only times that I ever got like a full-on copyright notice. Usually it's just like a little shove. Usually YouTube will say, okay, you kind of violated copyright and that means you can't monetize this. Well, I'm not making money on YouTube. But this was taken from me because it belonged on the New York Times site. Now I see what I want to show you is available as a YouTube video. So let's hope this works. If it doesn't, I'll have to patch in a little video and say sorry. But here's the thing. I asked a bunch of students yesterday if they would be interested in falling out of a plane at about 200 miles an hour, and so many hands went in the air. And I'm like, okay, well, let's consider this. There's a German guy who made a film a few years ago. It is one of my favorite things on the internet. And I love ideas sometimes that are complicated, and I also love ideas that are dead simple. And here was his idea. Let's go to a pool that has a 5-meter tower and a 10-meter tower. That's up there. And then let's put high-definition 4K cameras on the tower and put microphones. And then let's spend a couple days sending just regular, ordinary people to the top of that tower to see if they can jump. It is a study in vulnerability. The thing is called 10-meter tower. If you want to watch the whole thing, just Google it. It's gorgeous and it's fascinating, and it's a study in fear. Some people chicken out. The first guy just absolutely chickens out. He can't do it. My hero is the 66-year-old woman who's got to think about it, and I'm not going to be the spoiler alert on that one. But hopefully the internet won't give me a shove on this one. This is my favorite couple on the entire internet. They love each other so much, and they really got to have a conversation about courage. And their names are Linus and Frida, I think. And this will be my farewell to you. And I got another video coming your way tomorrow. I'll go up to Brainerd, I'll teach my classes, and I'll get right back to providing content for you. I hope you're enjoying the sunny but cold weather, and I hope you're tilting properly with me. Keep your eye on this, and keep your eye on D2.